You can multiply 3 by 3 and expect that to become 8 for a very long time.
This love that reaches to my heart feels so good.
Today I have the pleasure to welcome in the studio Engel, who was a European deputy and is one of the co-founders of the Fokus party. Welcome.
Thank you.
So first of all, let's jump into it. Can you present Fokus in a few words?
A few words are never enough, but I'll try to do as briefly as possible. Fokus is a political project that was carried by me and by Mark Ruppert most relevantly. We both had former careers in different parties. We left those parties for different reasons, but at the same time for the same reason. And that same reason was that we realized that governing parties, current and former, do not have the ambition any longer to reform this country, and that reforms are needed. Courage is needed, honesty is needed. They do not even manage an honest analysis any longer. How would they manage solving the actual problems? And this is why what the major parties in this country have been doing for decades is describe problems, repaint them every election instead of attacking them and solving them. And this hands-on approach, this way of looking at things where you say this is the problem and this is a solution that has not worked, so we go for something that can work, we invent it and we implement it, is in fact what characterizes Fokus on many levels, in many areas. Be that the economic growth, on which we're choking by now without it delivering benefits to people, be that the education system, which is in tatters. Be that the housing situation, which is being lamented now for decades, and when nothing is really ever done. All these are areas where we have elaborated I believe, courageous program, which is solution oriented.
So maybe talking about this, I was yesterday at the Chamber of Commerce, and all the numbers demonstrate that this country needs to be reformed.
Absolutely.
Structurally, I mean the big reform.
Yes.
But then the candidates really talk about, every proposition in their program is supposed to be part of the reform. So the big issue in Luxembourg is, if you call for a big reform, people will not vote for you.
No, that's what we believe. That's what we believe. But at the same time, obviously, a bigger party will want to have an appeal that's big enough to make more or less everyone more or less happy. Mm-hmm. And I've always said already in my CSV days, when that party had its best result in the post-war period at 38%, 62% were not voting for it. Mm-hmm. It was a big victory, but almost 2/3 of the people did not vote for it. So you cannot convince everyone.
True.
And since you cannot convince everyone, why pretend? Why not simply have the courage to articulate a number of things that need to be articulated? If we say every recipe that has been tried so far to solve the housing issue has failed, then we need to try new things, which is why we've proposed to no longer own the land so much as to lease the land, as it is done successfully in so many other places, and it cuts the price in half for those that are interested in really acquiring or renting affordable places to live in. Mm-hmm. But we need, of course, the land, and we need the political will to do it. Why not finally go for it? Just like we say, we want a tax reform apparently for everyone. Mr. Frieden preaches a tax reform where everybody pays less. Look, right now, the total income of the income tax, which is 6 billion euros, is not even any longer sufficient to cover the costs of the civil servants' salary payments. I'm not even talking about pension contributions. So this needs to be addressed. Mm-hmm. There is a substantial issue with imbalances in the budget, and you're not going to solve that if you say, well, it was a mistake to make public transportation free. That costs 40 million. We need billions.
Very good. So maybe a big point would be that you give us your analysis of Luxembourg today.
Well, Luxembourg today is something which in French would be called une société saturée. Mm-hmm. Saturated exists in English, but it's not exactly the same. Mm-hmm. Which means that, as we have the habit of saying in this country, we complain on a high level. Mm-hmm. But we do complain about things that are real as well. Mm-hmm. The country is a victim of its necessary growth. we attract 10 to 15,000 people into the country every single year as new residents. We don't have housing for them. We may have jobs for them, but we don't have housing for them. We don't have necessarily schools for them, childcare facilities for them, hospitals for them. And they're drowning in traffic. Train capacity for commuters is at 10% of the total commuter volume. That train capacity is supposed to double now in the next 10 years, but then it will be enough for 20% of the commuters. Or for 15 if we add the new ones who will come on top. So there is no way of continuing in the way that this country has been moving forward. Society is diverse. Luxembourgers are objectively less than half of the population because we've been throwing around passports for a while in order to keep the balance where it is. In fact, the balance is inverted. And the more people that come and the more we realize that we cannot continue just handing out passports, but that integration is really needed. We will need to integrate, which is a challenge that we've mastered in the past, but nowadays it's more parallel worlds than it is one. There is an issue of political participation by all these people who cannot accede to the civil service and who cannot vote. But on the contribution of whom, be it in taxes, be it in social security payments, we depend. And we will need to address the diversity also in terms of political participation for the future, which is one of the absolute avoidable topics in political debate. We don't have an energy policy that's worth the name. We don't have spatial planning any longer. We have an education system which is going down the drain, where we now have more or less formally adopted the view that we should really bring every single young man or woman to conclusion of secondary school and onto university with a massive quality drop in the value of these examinations that still exist, and with the result that no one in Luxembourg goes for crafts any longer. Which is a massive problem, because this is not going to be substituted by the bordering regions on a one-to-one base, and we will just face a situation where we will have more lawyers and dentists and art historians than we have carpenters and butchers, and that's a problem.
It is. So as you put it rightly, the reform we call for is massive.
Yeah.
It's in basically every sector.
And I haven't addressed pensions yet.
The pension, we know, I published recently that we talk about 495% of GDP in hidden debt,
Yeah.
which is, if you look at the July report from the European Commission, extremely scary
Yeah.
from a European point of view. So again, I don't think you will be elected this time. I hope I'm wrong, but
so do I.
but the main question is, how is Fokus and yourself planning to start influencing this? Because it's good to do a campaign, but I guess in the end you want to influence the future of the country.
Well, it's very simple. We will not manage to do that if we're not elected to parliament. And I'm not available for another round of 5 years of extra parliamentary press conferences. Then I will organize myself in a different manner, and then I will realize that if the people don't want to give us a mandate, that's their choice. But we need one in order to continue and in order to articulate the ideas that we formulated. We've written dozens of pages of, I believe, sensible material over the last months on every relevant aspect of public policy. We want to transport it. This is not so easy because there's a structural deficit also in terms of attention to smaller parties, because the constant attention is on the parliamentary ones, and most, of course, on either the governing ones or the one big one that pretends to do it in their stead. But we still believe that we can pull it off, and I will invest every minute of the coming 3 weeks and some to try and convince as many people as we possibly can that we need to enter Parliament this time, and that we need to carry our ideas to the parliamentary floor, because only then is it going to be possible to really take an influence on things. You don't do that with press conferences.
Okay, and maybe to conclude, I would like to have your thought about just a sentence. My analysis, which is data-driven, of the country clearly calls for the election of a Churchill. And I have the feeling, after we are 3 weeks away from the vote, that we're going to a Chamberlain coalition. What's your thought on that?
The comparison might have its merits, might be a little grand as well, but
It is.
but no, I absolutely concur insofar that I believe that all those who now govern, plus the one that absolutely wants to govern, meaning those four parties amongst whom, one way or the other, it is likely that the premiership is going to be dealt and government to be composed, do neither have the ambition, nor the will, nor the courage, nor even the competence to address the problems that we really face. And they have been governing until now. So the reason the country is in the shape that it's in is somehow linked to their inability to deliver. And if somebody is unable to deliver over such a long period of time, then it might be time to consider that they need to be replaced by something that can try to deliver something else. You know, you can multiply 3 by 3 and expect that to become 8 for a very long time. It will never work because 3 by 3 is 9. If you want 8, you have to multiply 4 by 2. And that is the paradigm change that we would ideally need. We're carrying it through this campaign as best we can. We do not pretend to pass any of those parties in terms of percentage or seats, but we hope that Luxembourgers will carry us into Parliament in order to be able to do these mathematical calculations and others in the institutions, because that's what's needed.
Yeah, and to conclude, I have to agree that it's a bit surreal to hear the coalition getting out of 10 years of power, describing what they will do for security at the Gare, or describing what they will do for lodging, housing. And yes, it's a bit surreal because you're like, hey guys, you've been on it for 10 years, so why are you suddenly so inspired?
Well, the Socialist Party has been in government for a quarter century without discontinuing, right? And before that, there was another party that has governed for the better part of half a century without discontinuing. And the problems that we now have are not new.
No.
Neither the housing problem, nor the security issue. What happened in this police station around here, the Gare Commissariat, was known 20 years ago.
True.
Mr. Frieden was police minister at the time. What did he do? Well, exactly the same that he will do after the next elections. Nothing relevant that would be incisive and that would risk putting a few people off. You have to be able to also say to the police at some point, look, you're not going to get new agents until kingdom come. We're going to take the agents that are there now, if necessary, complete their training in a meaningful way, and we're going to deploy you. But for that, you need a minister who is not only fascinated by uniforms and otherwise in charge of housing as well, but you need an interior minister who is inner security minister, which is a stupid title, by the way. An interior minister is by nature, and it's the case everywhere in the world except here, because Mr. Frieden wanted to be in charge of all the people wearing a uniform 20 years ago. You need an interior minister who is in charge of security and of immigration. That's the coherent brief, the coherent mandate that you can have as a courageous politician, and then you manage to reform. Also the police corps, and you can deploy it because you're in charge of territorial administration. That's the way it's done, not the way they do it, or they have done it.
Well, Frank Engel, thank you very much, and good luck for the election.
Thank you.
This love that reaches to my heart